was just nuts. Now, what are you up to? What is this that you've got? I see. So it's hot. Yeah, I know. And you want to trade your turtleneck in for a cute dress. I understand where you're coming from, but this dress was a present to me from a dear friend, and I don't think it'll fit you. Your shell's too big. We'll find you something fun to wear, okay? All right. I just had to show this. A dear friend sent me some treasures, and she tucked this in. Is this not the cutest thing you've ever seen? I think I've seen these things before, like in antique stores and like in ladies' craft magazine kind of things from like mid-century. I think like the 40s and 50s. This kind of stuff was popular, and it's got. So she had this little hanger. Isn't that cute? Oh, hey, Druid. I'm so glad you're here. But yeah, if you got stuff going on, all good. But I'm glad you're here, and I hope you had a good weekend. She put it on this tiny hanger. But yeah, so it has like a little loop on the back, and I think that these were meant to hang like in the kitchen. I think, I've seen some that were kind of listed as pot holders. I've seen both in the magazines and at antique stores. So I'm thinking that's how they were sort of advertised as a little craft project. They were not meant to be like hot pads. I mean, this is way too cute. So too much work. Hey, Marodem. It's so exciting to see you guys here. Anyway, I just thought this was so adorable. It looked, I don't collect that red and green handled kitchen stuff. I know that stuff is very popular. It was, I think it's Depression era, maybe 30s through the 50s. But you guys know what I'm talking about. It's got the wooden handles. I think they're rolling pins and like mashers and beaters and all that stuff. Yeah. So, a dish detergent bottle dress. Now that is a possibility. I had totally forgotten about those, and I have seen that too. But I'm thinking, and again, I could be wrong because I'd have to see the pattern that this was made from to really know. But, with this little loop, I'm thinking it's meant to hang, but you're absolutely right. I have seen that kind of stuff. And, I think this kind of just goes back to that idea of, sort of having things decorative when you can, in the 30s, not everybody was living like, grapes of wrath in the 30s, but, I think people just didn't have disposable income necessarily. And the economy is, and how many of us do now. But, when times are kind of rough, people want to beautify things. So I think that's kind of what these little projects are like. Hey, Kellen, happy Monday. But anyway, this has clearly never been used. It is so cute. And, the crochet on it is just impeccable. So anyway, my dear friend, if you're watching, you know who you are, obviously. And I thank you so much. So, yeah. It would be cute if it fit my turtle puppet, but he's way too big. He's always looking for some clothes. So, this weekend, y'all, it was nuts. I've mentioned kind of in passing that, I do other things other than quilt stuff. I've been working on a very long project. It's actually a volunteer project. And I can't really talk about it because I've signed an NDA. But I've worked on this project for about 18 months. It's related to accreditation in an emerging profession. It's kind of that's the interesting thing about, technology. And today there are these emerging professions that maybe people have been doing kind of independently on the fly as consultants for a while, but this is something that's kind of based on new technology. So, and it's not AI, so don't worry. I'm not involved in any with the robots. But anyway, it's kind of a high stakes thing, and I've been working on it, for about 18 months. And, it was, for the most part, it was a few hours a week for a long time. And now it's getting to like crunch time with the project. And, I knew this was coming. This is not a surprise. It's not like it crept up on me. But, when you set a timeline and you commit to things like 8 months ago And you think, oh, that's so far in the future. I'll have plenty of time. No big deal. It's on my calendar. And then you realize that you've overbooked yourself. And luckily I have nothing overlapping, but it is the kind of thing like where I'm running from one thing to another, and I just feel like I'm ill prepared for everything. But you see, I'm wearing my business casual today versus my just rolled out of bed, which is what you guys usually see. Working from home, it's I got in a really bad habit over the pandemic of not keeping my professional clothes, in good order, and probably most of it doesn't fit me anymore because, I got the the big pandemic butt from sitting all the time. In any event, I worked on this project over the weekend. I had some 4-hour stints where I was kind of tied to my desk working with a lot of people, and it takes a lot out of you. I used to teach a communications class, and I learned a lot about myself in this communications class where I'm an introvert. Maybe that surprises you, maybe it doesn't. But I really struggle when I've been in a position where I've had to be on for a long period of time without like being able to roll back and just be by myself and not taking a million phone calls and answering text messages and emails and all that stuff. And I haven't had that this weekend. And weekends are usually when I do that. It's when I kind of go in my little cave, I sew, or I go out and run errands and kind of, box everybody out. So with that this weekend, and then I've got 2 more days of this. I've got something tonight and something tomorrow. And then I'm done for a minute. And I could go back to my cave and I could finish my stuff for seminar, because I have 2 presentations that I need to be working on for seminar. One is my study center. The other one is a presentation I'm doing with our friend Jill on social media. So anyway, when it rains, it pours. And I know it sounds like I'm sitting here complaining. I truly am not. I'm grateful to be involved in all these projects, because even the one that's professional and not quilt related or sewing related is still something that fascinates me. It's just, it's the way life works, right? You go along for a while and you're like, yeah, I'm busy, but all good. And then you just get hit in the face with all this stuff. And, I'm a terrible procrastinator. I like to think about things for a long time, and then I'm like, oh, okay, I got to get that on paper because it's got to be finished tomorrow. And so then I have to scramble. I'm just laying bare all of my foibles here. But anyway, I thought for about a minute last night about maybe canceling today. And then I was like, no, if I cancel this today, I will spend a couple of hours not doing anything productive and probably worrying and being pelted with text messages. And being here, I can turn my phone off. I can talk to you guys. I know that you're a safe space. And I can kind of just turn that part of my brain off for a little bit, and I can think about the things I love that I didn't get a chance to look at so much this weekend. So I do have kind of a not, I don't want to say it's not interesting or exciting, because I think what I'm going to read is going to be very cool. But I don't have anything real specific to show you guys other than some random collecting. So I have a couple things to show you that are definitely sewing quilt adjacent. It's just a few little items. And then, a while back, Jill and I did a stream, and I cannot remember. Oh, Bonnie, thank you. I love spending time with you guys, and I appreciate the people that are almost always here. Kellen, Mardim, and of course, Druid is my long-suffering admin and friend here. But yeah, you guys come and I appreciate it so much. Sometimes I know I joke, but I'm kind of you come back for some reason. I really appreciate it. But anyway, Jill and I did a stream a while back, and one of the questions, we kind of tried a little AMA kind of thing, and I think Robin had asked, do you guys collect anything else? Because we're always talking about our needlework collections or our quilt collections. And I was like, oh, Lord, what do I not collect? Aw, Kellen, thank you. Druid. Mwah, mwah, sugar for you. Anyway, I realized there is something I do collect. So I think I had mentioned I collect, yes, collectors collect. I think I had mentioned I collect like children's housework things. So like I have some tiny ironing boards. I have my own tiny ironing board from when I was, gosh, I probably got it when I was 3 or 4 years old. I don't remember there being an iron, although there had to have been. It would not have made sense without an iron, but it's a little aluminum iron. And my mom recently was getting ready to throw it away, and she said, "I'm going to ask you one more time, do you want this?" And I was like, yeah, I want it. So I have a wooden ironing board. I have my own. I have some tiny irons. I have some little toy sewing machines. So I have all that kind of stuff, and it's all cute. And for the most part, it's all been, affordable. I'm just not the kind of collector that has, a big budget, obviously, but I just don't go after that stuff that's like, oh, mint condition, perfect. Like, I would love to have those things, I guess, but I kind of like the things that are a little, rusty and shop worn, and, they have a story. Somebody's played with them or used them, and loved items. They have a story. So, plus they're more affordable. So I started thinking about that, and indeed I do have a kind of a bigger collection of things, and it's mostly toys and dolls. And so I've got all of the kind of the homemade animals. I mean, you guys have seen some of those. And I've got some dolls from when I was a child. I have this very scary, like, it was child-sized. He's probably about 3.5 feet tall. Bozo the Clown. He's the rubber head, the yarn hair. I mean, he's terrifying, but I'll have to pull him out. He kind of sits in a shelf when he's got other things like in his lap, so I didn't pull him out today. But the Bozo the Clown really got me to thinking, and I was like, I have this basket of items that I collect, but they're in poor condition, but they're the kind of thing that can be restored. And right now, most of my collection is just sitting in a pile, and I thought, I'm going to grab this stuff and show you, because it is sewing adjacent. They're toys, but their restoration is going to require sewing and gentle washing, just like restoring a quilt. So even though they're not quilts, they're still interesting. So I thought I would show those to you in a moment. I also have something that I recently acquired for my Sunbonnet Sue collection, which is so heinous. And I had to work real hard to get it. And I'm like, I put in way too much effort to get this item, but it was so bad I had to get it. And then I was also on my very limited downtime this weekend. I was reading some things and pulled out kind of a big file of information I have that I've been collecting and reading and sort of putting it in this file to come back to. And I found something, I don't think I ever showed it to you guys. When I was at seminar last year, they have something called the endowment table. And so they have a bunch of different options for you to get things. And, many of the AQSG members at this point, I mean, sad to say, probably the vast majority of members are older and elderly women. And they have had, many of them have published. They've done, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. They have done research. They've published papers. They've published books. Many of them have very large collections of things. But also, when you get to a point in your life, and I'm at that point where I'm like, Stephanie, you need to start thinking about this stuff and not just... you get to a point in your life, where you have to pare down your collections. If you have published and you have like a noteworthy collection, you might start thinking about like donating it to an institution. So these ladies are doing a lot of that, and there's a few men too. But they do things like that. So they kind of call their collections and they think, oh, these are the things that are, not in perfect condition. I don't have room for them anymore, or I just want to get rid of the whole collection. So they will donate things to the benefit of AQSG, and those donations go into a couple different buckets. So the one bucket at seminar that's a big event, is the live auction. And Dana Balsamo, who we've looked at her auctions before, she presides over that. And so she does her auction pattern. It's so great. It's so wonderful. I hope I'm going to try to get some video this year so you can see what it looks like. I think we might have gotten some last year. But anyway, so she does the live auction, and those are for things that are like, you know, beautiful museum type pieces, you know, like really nice pieces, things by very famous people, that kind of stuff. And then the next kind of donations they do is the silent auction. And, you know, that's, if you've ever seen a silent auction, it's like each item has a little paper with it, and you have your auction bidding number, and you write your name, because it's all, you know, there are no friends in auctions, let me tell you that. But it's kind of all, I don't know, I guess while you're bidding, it's supposed to be anonymous or whatever. So you put your number down and your bid. And, you know, some things it's awesome. Like I got one thing for like a song and a dance. Another thing I had to really like outbid somebody on. But anyway, so there's those things. And you can get a great deal. And a lot of that stuff, you know, I was looking at, it's great for research because the silent auction items may be quilts, quilt tops, quilt blocks. You know, that's the vast majority of it. But there's also things like books and patterns and ephemera and all that kind of stuff. So wonderful stuff. And, you know, it's kind of like, I think for the people that donate, it's kind of like, you know, it's a win for them to donate and kind of get rid of stuff. I also think in some cases, some of the pricier stuff might qualify for like tax donation kind of stuff. I'm not sure. But, you know, there's a variety of reasons why people donate, and I'm grateful because being the baby researcher, I'm excited to see these things and learn from them. And, you know, it kind of gives me like, it's a weird flex to say, I own something by so-and-so, or I own something that somebody else, you know, once owned. So, and then the third and final way that you can kind of get things at seminar is through the endowment table. And I'll be honest, even being involved in some of the seminar planning, because Jill and I are doing some things to help out, I'm still not clear on how they decide things go to endowment versus silent auction. I'm not sure. I think some people donate specifically to endowment, but I do know that it's where the money goes. So endowment is a separate like account within the budget or the accounts, the money at AQSG. And I am not a nonprofit person. Y'all probably have some experience or knowledge that's way more than I have. But I do know the money goes to different places and what the organization is allowed to use it for. So that is a very long story to tell you about what I'm about to show you. I got these from the endowment table. And essentially with the endowment table, you're going up there, you're finding a thing you like, and you're making an offer. And I think pretty much the ladies at the endowment table are like, they accept every offer unless it's ridiculous. So I got these, and they're cocktail napkins from what I have researched. But Druid, I hope you're still here, girl. They're hillbillies. This is Uncle Cletus having a drink out of his jug. And this is Papa taking he's taking a little nap by the tree with his jug and his corncob pipe, and I think his rifle's back there. Cousin Jim Bob out hunting with his dog. Look at their beards. Oh my gosh, their beards are just the absolute best. Here's Meemaw. She's looking at the jug saying, Papa, why'd you drink all the corn liquor? A little tobacco smoke by the tree. Yeah. A little chaw and a smoke. And then finally, Cousin Cletus, he went back to school. This one gets me the most. Poor, yes, Dog Patch characters. Poor Cousin Cletus had to go back to the first grade to learn how to spell and do math, and he's sitting there with his beard. I know. They all have these ridiculous hillbilly beards. I saw these, and I was like, what? Now, I did the research last year when I got these, and then I tucked them away and didn't do anything else with them. but back to school with a beard. I know, right? So what I found, I never found these, and I need to go back and look. I never found these specifically, but I did find a whole bunch of other different kinds of them. And apparently, they're mid-century, I think like early 60s maybe, and they I feel like, they're from overseas. This tiny, tiny, fine stitching is, my mom had showed me some other things. They weren't cocktail napkins necessarily. They were kind of like dresser scarves, but they have the same level of fineness. I mean, this is like a very fine lawn, or, they may have been laundered or something, but it's lawn, or organdy or something. It's a very fine cloth. I think organdy would be wrong. Organdy's stiffer. But yeah, it's some kind of very fine fabric. And then these itty bitty little, look at the little teeny tiny stitches on the back that have appliqued this stuff. It is just teeny, teeny, teeny tiny. And so some of these dresser scarves that I have that are similar, I think I have one or two. My mom said, now you'll see these being sold for like, oh, this handwork, it's such fine handwork. And it is fine handwork, but they're not as old as people think they are. And they were actually stitched like in the Philippines, like in the 60s. So, some of your, East Asian, South Asian countries that were, doing this kind of work. But she told me that she was pretty sure the Philippines was one location for this very specific, like, cottage industry type of, like, heirloom sewing. But anyway, to circle back, I didn't find these, but I found similar things, and they were all kind of kooky and corny. And there was, I remember there being like skiers and I don't know, people on picnics and can dancers. Just wild kinds of stuff. And they were specifically little cocktail napkins. Just, mid-century, you're having a few friends over for martinis and bridge. And, you want to make fun of the mountain folk. So you're going to have this, these corny little napkins. That's apparently what they were. So anyway, it's one of those things, like I'll do some more research when I get time, but they are so funny. I just like, what a crazy thing. So now the other thing I have to show you is for my Sunbonnet Sue stuff. And let me tell you the backstory about these. And when I show them to you, you're going to be like, oh my God. So, I have some of those like, searches set up for eBay and Mercari and Etsy and stuff for things that are Sunbonnet Sue related, but I'm really looking for vintage and antique, and I'm discerning. If I accepted every Sunbonnet Sue thing that somebody wanted to give me or that I see, I would be literally drowning in a mountain of stuff, because Sunbonnet Sue is so ubiquitous. Sunbonnet Sue is everywhere, even now, and certainly historically. So I'm kind of, I have sort of some standards about what Sunbonnet Sue stuff that I'm going to go ahead and either purchase or put in the collection. So on Mercari, I see what I'm about to show you, and I was like, oh God, that is heinous. That is awful. That is like the dictionary definition of where Sunbonnet Sue and Overall Sam they've hit the pinnacle of tacky. Actually, I have found something slightly tackier, but I looked at it, and the pictures made it look just like a little bit more neon colored than it actually is, but still. So I reached out to the people because the price they had on it, plus the shipping, and I don't know if you guys are ever bought anything from Mercari, but there's this theme going on with selling platforms. I think Etsy has now done, or is doing this, and Mercari has now done it, where the seller doesn't pay fees. So like if the seller puts something up for $20, they're going to get $20. They're not going to have to, take the like a credit card fee out of that. They're not going to have to take, the seller fee out of that. They're not going to have to, deal with any of those fees. They get on they go to the buyer. I'm sorry. So, something that you're buying for $20, And then, add in the shipping that the seller will charge. And usually the shipping, sometimes I see people that are asking for shipping and I'm like, no, I ship a lot of stuff. I know how much it costs you to ship that. And if you're not using pirate ship or something like that for, higher volume shipping, you're being, the post office is bilking you. You need to use pirate ship. Anyway, so long story short, I was like, the shipping is too high on these things. So let me see. And also what she was charging for it. I was like, girl, nobody's going to buy that thing for what you're charging. So I made an offer, which I still think was very generous. And they declined. And they came back with, like it was a negotiation. And I was like, I declined their second offer. I was like, I'm not negotiating for this. And again, when you see it, you're going to like, really? So I was like, I'm sorry, I'm not interested at that price. Well, then they were like, bid again or make an offer again. So I was like, all right. So the way Mercari's offer system works, like if you made an offer for $15, it's not going to let you make that offer again. It's going to say, oh, well, now you have to do like $15.50 or $16, whatever. So I was like, okay, now I have to offer a little bit more than I wanted. So I make that offer again. And I never hear from them. And I was like, look, this thing does by no means have to be, these things do not have to be in my collection. I'm done with you. A month later, they send me my original offer. At this point, I'm over these things, but I'm going to go ahead and pull the trigger because, maybe these people need the money. This is what I got. This is what I spent like literally a month haggling with people over. Hey, Kenny. Oh my gosh. Yeah, and it's frustrating when people put things out for sale and then and I know things happen. And, sometimes I guess you put something out for sale and people don't, jump on it right away and then you forget. So, yeah, that's kind of irritating, but yeah. I know. If I had a pattern, I could have made these. They are crochet. And yes, acrylic, acrylic. The best part, so somebody, and looking at the seller's other items, they're clearly the kind of people that go to probably Goodwill and the bin stores and all that stuff and get things. And nothing they were selling was like garbage, but nothing they were selling was but anyway, at some point somebody had used popsicle sticks to identify them. This is not the weirdest thing. Yes, this definitely has that, it's, what's the word I'm looking for? So if you go buy a skein of acrylic yarn today, say at, the craft store, they're usually, it's real shiny, it's slick kind of. This stuff has a very it's almost like a crunchy feel. And I don't know if it's because of the way the stuff was stored, it kind of doesn't age well or what. But yeah, it's got this kind of, I don't know if you can hear that. But anyway, so the popsicle sticks, which have been woven into their clothing, do say Sunbonnet Sue and Overall Sam. But the way people had them listed was vintage him and her. So now Sam, he has a head under there, no face. Sue, on the other hand, there's nothing in there. So I have to say it's cute, but these are definitely and I need to wash them because they look a little grimy, but these are definitely just a product of their time. And yeah, very kitsch. Yes, Kenny, right? Vintage him and her. So I thought you guys would get a kick out of that. Oh gosh. Now most of the things in my Sue collection are definitely they connect to some research element of my Sue research, but this stuff. Okay, so one last thing to show you, and this is back to my collection. So like I said, I've got that Bozo the Clown. I got that clown when I was about 3, And he's actually kind of cute. Like, if you are not afraid of clowns, he's actually kind of cute. He really does look like Bozo. And like I said, he's got the rubber head. And so, I won't drag this out any further. I have a small collection of rubber-faced or rubber-head dolls or toys, stuffed animals. They were very specific for, a time and period, mid-century. They made them up into the 70s, the ones that I am most interested in, although they technically still make rubber-faced toys. They're made out of something different. It's not really rubber. It's like just a plastic. But what we're talking about here are like stuffed animals that then have like, a face stitched in that's plastic or rubber. And some of the mid-century companies were Rushton. Rushton is one. That's the big one. And Knickerbocker, which is another you're probably familiar with. Gund, which is still around. Gund is still around. But they made stuff. So, like I said, my clown is probably, I don't remember, I think he's Knickerbocker, or I think he's Knickerbocker. But a number of years ago, now that I think about it, it's probably 15 years ago, I was in California visiting a friend. We went to a swap meet. I did get some cool, like, quilty stuff. I got, like, an apron, like a 1940s, 1950s apron. I got a quilt top that it's a foundation string piece quilt top that I just still absolutely love. I've used it as my background, like in my professional glamour shot. If you're familiar with that picture, there's a quilt behind me. I'm wearing a black shirt, and that's the quilt I picked up, or the top I picked up. But for some reason, I found this guy. Let me show him to you. And like, I think I literally paid like $5. So, oh, Bonnie, yeah, they did. They made the Disney characters. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure who made those. I don't know if they were Rushton or not. Rushton did make a lot of things, and when I'm getting ready to show you, that were like TV kind of stuff. Things that were famous, like, let me show you. So I bought this guy probably for $5. And the reason is because he's in bad shape and he's been in a fire. Look at his shoes. This one's like literally like got cardboard melted to it. And he kind of smelled like fire. He doesn't smell like fire anymore, but he's kind of, he's got some trouble. And so for a very long time, he sat on a shelf, and I did my research. He's Rushton, and what he is Zip, or Zippy. And if you are a person of a certain age, maybe a tad bit older than me, you might be familiar with the Howdy Doody show. It was a little before my time, but my mom knew it. And Zippy was the actual chimpanzee that was in that show at a certain point, and I think he was around for a while. So this is Zippy. Rushton made Zippy, or Zip. I don't think this is his original shirt. His original clothes are supposed to be like overalls and then a shirt, I think, and it looks like it's kind of a t-shirt type thing that says Zip on it. Kenny, you still have one? Do you have one of these, or just okay, yours has been remade? Okay. Well, that's my intent with this poor guy, is to, if I can find clothes, I will, but I'm thinking of just making him clothes. I'm not planning on selling these or anything. I just want them to be back to their glory. Because I feel sorry for a toy that's been so loved. It needs to have like these, glorious final days. He has, I'm not sure what this string situation is. He's got a squeaky arm. Is it given to you by your grandmother? You came home from the hospital. Oh, so sweet. So anyway, I had him forever. He sat on a shelf. I always looked at him and I'm like, you poor little guy in your burn-up shoes. Well, when I'd done the research on him and I'm like, oh, okay, this is who he is. And then I found out he's probably the one that people, I don't want to say they like the least, but he's not as sought after as some of the other Rushtons. And he's kind of, I think they made a lot of them. And Rushton also has ones that are, well, some of the other companies knocked off Rushton. There was lots of knockoffs. And there's one where it's a monkey holding a banana, but I don't think it's supposed to be Zippy or Zip. Now, she did not appear, to my knowledge, in the Howdy Doody show, but apparently Zippy had a girlfriend named Tippy. And this is her. She's missing her dress. And when I got her, my initial intention at first was to harvest her shoes for Zippy. And then when I got her, and she was an eBay purchase. Oh, yours has the banana. Okay. Rushton made one with a banana, I think, but there was also some knockoffs. And they're big names, like Gund. Gund knocked off Rushton, even though they were both big toy names. But anyway, I got her. It's like, she's in pretty good condition. You know, she's still got the head tilt from, you know, her neck being, I think the neck is like the thing that the stuffing goes first. But I'm like, she's in good condition. I can't take away her shoes and give them to Zippy, you know? So she's going to be restored. And for her, it's just a matter of giving her clothes back. So I probably will have to make a little outfit. You know, I think it's cool to go after and try to get the original mint condition clothing. But I also kind of like the idea of restoring to make her something modern that kind of looks like her old. I don't know. We'll see. This is like when I make my 8th day. When I rip the space-time continuum to make my 8th day, my 25th hour. Yeah. So anyway, she's eventually gonna be restored. And these are actually, I don't want to say they're easy to restore, but if you have sewing skills and, you know, like if you've ever rehabbed quilts, it's the same process. It's like you have to carefully soak them. In the case of these, you unstitch their back and you pull out all their stuffing. And the Rushtons are usually stuffed with, it's factory waste. And I've watched some of the restoration videos over the years, and there's like been a real, like lately, the past couple years, there's been a ton of them. And they always talk about the stuffing, and they're like, oh, I don't know what this interesting stuffing. And I'm like, it's factory waste. How do they not realize that? Because it's a whole bunch of strings and like insulation looking stuff. It's just, you know, you'll know it if you see it. And you might be able to see it when I'm getting ready to show you. So anyway, long story short, now I've got Tippy and Zippy. I still need to replace Zippy's poor little feet. And that is when I found this poor gentleman. I don't know, he's lost a lot of his stuffing, but his shoes are in really good shape. Somebody has nibbled his fingers off. He's got his squeaker. Tippy's squeaker is broken. So I'm thinking I can harvest this guy's squeaker for Tippy, and I can get Zippy's shoes off of him. And then his poor head, I don't know, we'll do something. But anyway, you can kind of see, I don't know if it's kind of see what this stuffing that's in there. I can pull a little bit of it out. This has got the foamy stuff in it. But it's like, it's just, you know, it's just junk from manufacturing. One guy whose videos I've watched, he claims that he's found all kinds of like debris inside of them. And I don't know if he's specifically talking about Rushton or one of the other companies. He says he claims to have found a cigarette butt before. And I'm like, oh my God. But that kind of tracks if it's a matter of like it's some kind of debris that they've swept up and thrown in a bin, and then they're just grabbing it out and stuffing these toys. I don't know. So I have 2 others that are just, they just want to be rehabbed. The one, I've left her in her packaging because some of her fur is this little, and she's got one of those little chimes inside. She is Knickerbocker, and she's made in Japan, which I thought was interesting. Offcuts from upholstery. Possibly, you know, I mean, some of these things, like, I think you kind of have to do the research on how these companies were sold to each other. And I think there's probably a lot of information that's missing because you've got overseas stuff. You've got some of the quilt related research I've been doing recently with quilt kits. Oh my gosh. Mid-century manufacturing was very all over the place. Their record keeping is bad. There was lots of like corporate espionage kind of stuff. They're all knocking each other off. It's interesting, and it is kind of challenging. But yeah, offcuts from upholstery. I can only imagine some of these, and this kind of fur stuff that they were made out of. The monkeys are a little bit more like fur, like stuffed animal fur. But this is like, it's almost like a mohair. But it's not mohair, but it's kind of got that like short pile nap to it. Yeah, Mara, that might be absolutely right. Made with all new materials, because some of these older ones, yeah, that's what they were stuffed with, was just this old junk. And probably some kid ripped it open and like found a giant piece of metal or a cigarette butt or something. And, people cried foul. And so 70s toys started to be manufactured with, we're not going to put cigarette butts in your toys. So anyway, she's kind of like, she's going to have some new materials. Like this bottom must be, it looks like it's wool, because, let me take her out. Some of her looks like it's wool because you've got some like moth holes in this material. And I mean, it could be wear, but the fiber actually, this flannel feels almost like woolly. Like this is a pretty nice type of fabric. And I'd have to research. There's no date on it, but I suspect she's probably a little bit older. She's probably from the 60s or maybe, I don't know. And then my final one, this is not a huge collection, but my final one, that was my most recent acquisition. And I put the bonnet on him because it fits. Do you guys know who this is? I have to wait and see. He is a little bit more, let me take off the bonnet. He's missing all of his accessories, but he's in pretty good condition. And what I would like to do is make his accessories for him. But I would not have recognized him because he's the wrong color. But anybody have any idea who he is? He doesn't look like what he is. Charlie Horse. He's Quick Draw McGraw. But yes, he's a horse. Quick Draw McGraw was a horse. But the Quick Draw McGraw, it's a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, if you're not familiar. There was Quick Draw McGraw, Deputy Dog, Huckleberry Hound. Quick Draw's little sidekick was El Kabong. Yeah, I don't remember that one. I always remember oh gosh, there was the cat. There's a cat and a mouse. And I'm drawing a complete blank on them. It's right on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, I definitely, Huckleberry Hound was the one I watched a lot. And they were, they were not like the full-blown, however long, like the Flintstones were, but they were shorter things. But they were definitely still running when I was really little, so I think, early 70s. But Quick Draw McGraw, the commercial... Oh, okay, so he was Quick Draw's alter ego. Okay. Oh, Maro Dim, I love that you're a fan. Yeah. Hanna-Barbera stuff is like my childhood. But yeah, he's supposed to be white. His body was supposed to be white, the cartoons I saw, he was, and then he had a little cowboy hat, and he should have had a little gun belt and a badge. It looked like it was like a little red plastic badge. And I did some research. I know what all his stuff looks like. So I want to try and make his accessories and bring him back. He's in pretty good condition. The only issue, he's a newer. He's probably like first few years of the 70s. In the 70s, yeah, why is he blue? That's the question. Or I think it's supposed to be gray. It's sort of a blue gray. In the 70s, they were stuffing things with foam instead of that. And let me see, does it say on here all new materials? No, it just says he's washable, sanitary manufacturing conditions. There you go. Non-toxic, non-allergenic. But this foam stuff, if you can imagine, like, if you've ever seen like an old foam bed pillow, And it literally turns like the foam after so many years of just being handled and squished and moved around and probably like humidity and moisture and stuff, it turns into this nasty, like sandy kind of like bleh. That's what these are stuffed with. And you know, I actually have I have a line on some, it's not vintage or antique, but I have a line on some factory refuse that would be accurate to restuff these. So we'll see. This is a project that's probably not going to happen until next year, just because I just have so much stuff going on this year. But I do, yes, a grit. And hey, Janet, how are you? Yeah, it's nasty. And the restoration videos I've seen where people pull it out, it's gross. It's like, oh, they wear gloves because they don't want to touch it because it's just gross. But anyway, I want to restore these just for my my little collection. I don't have any intent of selling them. The restored ones and the conserved ones go for all kinds of prices online. I mean, you can buy the or bid on the monkeys anywhere from like $20 some to like over $100, depending on what kind of condition they're in. Quick Draw, I did find someplace online where it was he wasn't mint condition, but he had all of his pieces in. He had his original box. But I couldn't tell what the site was. It looked a little fishy, and I was kind of like, probably shouldn't click on this. But, yeah, so anyway, he's a little cutie. I think that Quick Draw was probably also a little bit more common than some of the other ones. But what I was going to say, his little, if you're not familiar with Quick Draw McGraw, his little sidekick was a burro. So like a little donkey. Its ears were longer. They kind of stood straight up, and he had a little sombrero. Like a very like stereotype. I'm not sure if does it work today or not. I'm not sure, but it's very cute. So anyway, this was my weird random collection of today. And I don't think Robin's here today, but thanks to Robin for getting my brain working on like, what do I have squirreled away that is kind of my collection / things that are interesting to me. Yeah, it is. Babalooey. Yeah. Yeah, Janet, right? Like there is a guy, I'm not exactly sure where he is. He looks very young. He's probably in his late 20s, early 30s would be my guess. I say young. I'm 50. That feels like child to me, somebody in their 20s. But he's so cute, and he's got all of this like pink kitschy sort of, like he does the Barbies, he does the Retchton, like all the stuff. And I just love to look at his videos because he's got these shelves behind him just full of this like just cool stuff. And he shows restoration. So a metal Tonka Jeep to restore. Now the metal toys, those restoration videos are really interesting. The guys who do those, I mean, I think there was a TV show for a while, wasn't there? Like a restoration garage, and the guy, I mean, he did stuff from toys to all kinds of things. Oh, yay, Kenny, you got your 99K. Awesome. That's great. So do you mean like you got it working, or you got your hands on it? Yeah, you have been where I was last year with the sewing machines. I still have one I need to get back to. I'm sitting here talking, like, right? I have all of these things I want to do in like 0 time. So yeah, sewing machines are another hobby. I don't have a massive collection. They're the ones that I have. My intent is to get them running again and sell them. I've actually gotten like 2 or 3 running again and just need to get them. Yeah. Oh, nice. You know, and I noticed, Kenny, you posted something the other day about having a source for the little tabletop boxes. Some of them sit down in that. I would love to talk to you offline about that because I haven't been able to find anybody, and I think I have 2 machines that don't have their little base. And I know you need those little lollipop. Some of them need that little lollipop hinge and stuff, but I don't want to get off into that. But yeah. Oh, interesting. Drafting so you can print. Awesome. That's interesting. All right. We need to have that conversation offline sometime because that stuff is very interesting. I noticed you were streaming the other day. I didn't get a chance to jump on, but if you were talking about sewing machines and stuff, I'm probably going to have to go catch that one. So that is all of the randomness that I have on my desk for you today. It seriously looks like a bomb went off. Not that it doesn't always look like a bomb went off on my desk, but it's super bad today. So the book I want to start reading is a revisit of Ruth Finley. It is The Lady of Godey, Sarah Josepha Hale. And a very long time ago, in fact, it was probably November, because it was Thanksgiving. And Sarah Josepha Hale is supposedly the person who, for a long time in the late 1800s, was pushing for the United States government to, I guess the word I'm looking for, like, to codify Thanksgiving. Lots of communities in the U.S. did celebrate a type of Thanksgiving sort of event or holiday, but there was no national holiday of Thanksgiving until the late 1800s, and it was because of this lady, the Godey's lady. Godey's, of course, was a ladies' fashion magazine, and I think it's known as the first. And I mean, we're talking, this is early stuff. The dates off the top of my head, we're gonna find out. I know it's in here, but these are like 1830s kind of dresses. So, oh, that's awesome, Kenny. Oh yeah, we definitely need chalk. I have a couple of cases that I've stripped and have ready to recover. So Sarah Hale was often called just the lady editor. She was employed as the editor of Godey's, but like they didn't give her a byline necessarily. They called her the lady editor, which, I mean, I'm like, this is the way things went, I suppose, in the 19th century. But it's just a really interesting story, in my opinion, and one that Godey's gets referenced a lot. And I feel like outside of the costume aspect of it, which is really the few little tidbits I know about Godey's, I discovered when I was doing a lot of historical costuming research. Oh, I just realized there's a piece of paper in here. Oh, random paper. I always like to find things in used books. So anyway, I thought this was the time for me to learn, and you can learn with me. And, Ruth Finley's an interesting writer. We've read her quilt book. Hers was the second one published. Marie Webster's book was published first. Ruth Finley then published her book about quilting. She wasn't a quilter, though. So, it's funny, actually, not to digress too much, but this weekend I participated in the Arizona quilt study group. They quarterly have a speaker, and I got on their mailing list, and I think they have a great website if you're interested, especially if you're out on the West Coast and closer to Arizona. They sometimes will do in-person events, and they're real organized, and they have a really good group. Check them out. I can't remember what their website is, but if you Google, Arizona Quilt Study Group, you'll find them. But this quarter they had Janniken Smucker speaking, and she is well known for two things generally, and right now. She just released a book about the WP era quilts, and the Depression era, all the stuff about, the government was essentially, scooping up women and teaching them some sewing skills and getting them to produce quilts and stuff. So it's a really interesting story. It's one I've kind of dipped into periodically. Just, I don't see it ever becoming like my research, but it's something that I just love to read about. And she's also somewhat of an authority on Amish quilts. And she is a professor at Westchester University. I think it might be a college, but I think it's University of Westchester. And so she had she's always a really fascinating lecturer. She also was involved in the was it Patterns and Paradox, the Amish quilt show that is at the Smithsonian American History Museum right now. So she's a really accomplished person. Anyway, I always like to listen to her lectures, especially about Amish stuff, because she comes from Yeah, Westchester University. Thanks, Bonnie. Yeah, it's in Pennsylvania. It's right outside of Philadelphia, isn't it? She grew up in a modern Mennonite family. So, not all Mennonites are dressed plain, but they do descend from the Amish Mennonite orders that, we think of as like the Pennsylvania Dutch Amish, like, it's a very long explanation, in my opinion, about, the way that these religious sects came about. But just suffice it to say, she's from Indiana. And so she's coming from kind of a different, not tradition, but just sort of a different group, where things are a little bit different in the Lancaster area, Amish and Mennonites, than, say, the communities in Indiana or Ohio or Illinois. They're all a little bit different. So anyway, long story short, she's really interesting when she lectures about Amish because, Amish quilts, because she was like immersed in the community, and, kind of learned some of this history, like first person, because she lived in these communities and had access to, Mennonite quilters and some of the historical knowledge about the Amish and the Mennonites. Anyway, the point I'm getting to here is she mentioned Ruth Finley a couple times, and I'm like, she was going at it from the perspective of some of the things that Ruth talked about and showed in her book. And as it pertains to like this WPA stuff, but I was kind of like, I don't have the greatest faith in Ruth Finley, simply because there are things in her first book that are 100% wrong. There is data that proves it's wrong. And she wasn't a quilter. And I'm not saying that people who aren't quilters can't write amazing quilt history, because they can, and they do. And there's lots of folks, my AQSG friends, who are maybe not hardcore quilters, or they have never quilted a stitch in their life, but they're immersed in quilt history and they know their stuff. Ruth Finley was a journalist. She was not a historian. So I think her research methods may have been different than somebody who's coming at it from a research, almost academic perspective versus a journalist. Ruth Finley, if you don't remember, because she wrote the book on quilts, she also wrote she's from Indiana too, and she wrote some like kind of undercover journalism for the paper she and her husband worked for. Like, she went in as she went into service. So kind of today we would just call it like our housekeeper. But back then, the idea of being in service was, you were a scullery maid for a rich family, or, that kind of service and help. She went undercover as one of those people. In fact, I think she went undercover as a scullery maid. And so it was like she was kind of trying to, bust the industry of service workers. And I've never read her information about that, whatever her writing was about that. But it's interesting to say, like, she was one of those kind of people. And when I say those kind of people, that sounds awful. That's not what I mean. But just like that was where her mind was kind of getting in there and observing. She and her husband also wrote, and I think it was primarily his writing and not hers, but they wrote the book Our Unseen Guest, which I read last year in conjunction with the other books I was reading. And it was weird, as all of you who were there can attest. I know Druid was there for the duration. And, it was basically about the haunting that they experienced, or the psychic phenomenon that Ruth experienced. So she's coming from an interesting place. And that's why her writing is good. But I don't know, what is truth? What is, the anecdotal information of the day? I don't know. We're going to find out. Like I said, I did read the passage in here where, she talked about Thanksgiving, and I think we read Sarah's, I'm looking through here, the chapter on Thanksgiving. I think there was a passage from Sarah, where, I'm looking through here, it's later in the book, where she's talking about, this is why. Yes, absolutely, a type of Nellie Bly. And Nellie Bly, if you don't know who she is, she was also an investigative journalist, which it's amazing, these women that, I mean, they didn't have the right to vote, and they were getting in there doing, this kind of stuff, and it's like, it's kind of scary, and especially with Nellie, she could have gotten herself real stuck. Nellie Bly got herself admitted to a women's sanitarium. The one that it's in New York, it's like something island. And it was a notoriously, bad sanitarium. It was the kind of place where just on the word of your husband, you could get admitted. Basically like, maybe you're talking about, I want the right to vote. I'm interested in suffrage, or I am depressed and overworked and things are just bad right now. And instead of going, honey, you need a rest, her husband would say, honey, you are crazy. You need to be locked up. So, and I'm painting with broad brush strokes here. Not Rikers. It was like, this is totally not the right name, but it was something like Black Rock Island or something like that. If you Google Nellie Bly, that's probably the first thing that comes up about her. Anyway, the Killer Inside author. Oh, I don't know. Nellie Bly, I'm not sure. That one's not familiar to me. Nellie was writing, I want to say she was a contemporary of Ruth Finley. I mean, I think we're talking like, she might have been even a little before Ruth Finley, so late 1800s. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So she did she pulled a Nellie Bly, but I think stakes were much higher for Nellie Bly than they were for Sarah. For Ruth. I think you could kind of, Ruth wrote The Killer. I'm not familiar. I don't know. I'd have to look at that. I'm not sure. I'm sure she wrote more than I'm aware of. Her newspaper, her journalism. But anyway, let us start on this because I'm very interested to hear what she has to say, and at least from a biographical standpoint, I think this is legit. I don't think that she's made up anything. I just, when I talk about the quilt book maybe not being the greatest, is that there were Blackwell's Island. That's it. Thank you. Yes, now it's Roosevelt Island. Yeah. The asylum at Blackwell's Island. Yeah, and it was the kind of thing, it was bad conditions, and probably more than half the women in there were just probably depressed and anxious and would have been fine with a bit of a rest. But instead they were thrown in, and it was real hard once you got in there. And I think this might have been the issue with Nellie, was she got in there and then she's like, okay, look, I've done my inside journalism. It's time for me to go. I'm not really crazy. And they're like, that is exactly this kind of thing a crazy person would say. You're going to have to stay. Like, oh God. Anyway, I would like to read a little bit more about Nellie Bly because her whole thing sounds really interesting. But all right, so let's see what we can get to in this book. I think we could probably get into 2 chapters of it, just looking at what's available. Because, guys, when I get off here, I got to go do 4 hours of other work. All right. Chapter 2 looks a little bit long. We'll see how far we get in there. All right. So without further ado, let us get started. So we are reading The Lady of Godey's, Sarah Josepha Hale, by Ruth E. Finley. And this book was printed in... Oh, here's a list of... Oh, no, they just have old patchwork quilts on the women who made them as her other writing. Of course, our unexpected guest, or unseen guest. Our unseen guest was written anonymously under a nom de plume, and I think it was long after she and her husband were deceased that it came out, who actually wrote that book. So that one was never advertised. So this is 1931. So this is a first edition. Woohoo! It was kind of, the jacket was in terrible shape, so I recovered it. And there is a very, very light pencil mark in here. It's so faded. I'm going to try to see if I can take a picture and darken it. But there is an inscription in here. And all I can really make out is the date, 1931. I'm not even going to hold it up because I don't even think it'll translate on the screen. But Okay, so 1931. Chapter 1, The Lady Editor. Let me get a little sip before I start. Okay, so Chapter 1, The Lady Editor. She was responsible for Thanksgiving as a national holiday. She was the early champion of elementary education for girls equal to that of boys and of higher education for women. She was the first to advocate women as teachers in public schools. As the friend and advisor of Matthew Vassar, she helped organize Vassar College, the first school of collegiate rank for girls. She demanded for housekeeping the dignity of a profession and put the term domestic science into the language. She began the fight for the retention of property rights by married women. She founded the first society for the advancement of women's wages, better working conditions for women, and the reduction of child labor. She started the first day nursery, boon to working mothers. She was the first to stress the necessity of physical training for her sex. She was the first to suggest public playgrounds. She was among the earliest to recognize health and sanitation as civic problems and the first to crusade for remedial measures. She organized and for many years was the president of the Seamen's Aid. Now we're talking about people that work on ships. So president of the Seamen's Aid, establishing the first sailor's home. So she wasn't just working for women, she was working for lots of people. She sent out the first women medical missionaries. She raised the money that finished Bunker Hill Monument. She rescued the movement to preserve Mount Vernon as a national memorial. Yes, CSEA. She was the author of some 24 books and hundreds of poems, including the best-known child's rhyme in the English language, Mary Had a Little Lamb. Did you know that? In some of these I wonder, gonna assume that there's written research or, written data to prove this stuff, but wow. I mean, if all of this is absolutely her work, she was an amazing lady. And I'm not done yet. She was the first woman editor in this country, and for more than 40 years presided over the destinies of Godey's Ladies' Book, the most widely circulated magazine of her times. Her name was Sarah Josephel Buell Hale. She signed herself the Lady Editor. Only less remarkable than her accomplishment is the fact that this woman was 38 years old before she started on her career. All of her achievements took place after she was 40. There's hope for me. I mean, that is amazing. Not only did she have all of this stuff accredited to her, she also, she really didn't get her start until later in life, which is, that's really inspiring. It's never too late to make some kind of impact on the world. Success at that age is not unusual today. Indeed, most modern business and professional women, like men, attain recognition only in middle life. But first they have qualified through years of training and youthful struggle. Sarah Hale stepped from the all-enveloping shelter of early 19th century marriage, untrained, unschooled by contacts outside the home, and she stepped into nothing. Less than nothing, for not only was she left penniless by the sudden loss of her husband, somehow their 5 children must be supported, the eldest a boy of 7 years. To the youngest, she gave birth 2 weeks after his father's death. So, yeah, this woman, we're probably going to get around to it. My assumption is, she did not come from poverty, but, at that time it doesn't matter almost. You're a widow with 5 young children, all who are under the age, or 7 or under. My gosh, that's rough. All her life had been spent in the town where she was born, reared, and married, Newport, New Hampshire. Only a village still, but in those days a mere settlement hemming in its few pioneer families by its inland isolation, even as to this day it stands hemmed in by the surrounding mountains. Is it the White Mountains of New Hampshire? I've been to New Hampshire a few times, but only to the lakes. I don't know the mountains. Surely only in inveterately provincial viewpoint could be expected from a 40-year-old woman whose experience was no broader than life as it was lived in a little country community 100 years ago. Nor should it be overlooked that Mrs. Hale succeeded in an age when for a gentleman to earn money was a social impropriety, if not an economic impossibility. I'm sorry, a gentlewoman. I said gentleman. A gentlewoman to earn money was a social impropriety, if not an economic impossibility. There was no place in pre-Victorian or in Victorian drawing rooms or counting rooms for working women. Sarah Josepha Hale was to prove the unique exception of her times. She climbed to the very top in business and at the same time found among the socially elect the personal friends of her maturity. Totally unknown, she, a middle-aged woman supporting herself and children by the work of her own hands and brain, won her way into the exclusive houses of Boston and Philadelphia and became a familiar and influential figure in the society of both cities. In fact, she used society to further her professional ends. So, she was the first editor to form sponsorship committees. So before I move on, let's look at a portrait. This portrait, let's see, it was painted by W.B. Chambers and engraved for Godey's Lady's Book by W.G. Armstrong. And it's got a signature on it that says, I think it's truly your friend, Sarah J. Hale. So this is what she looked like. She looks like a lovely lady. Underneath her modern conventionalism, and that was ever the surface she showed the world, Mrs. Hale was doubtless ambitious. But first she was a reformer, a promoter, always an enthusiast. Yet she never permitted her enthusiasm to run away with her judgment. Here, ambition entered and insisted on definite achievement. Her dreams were then calculatingly controlled, and she never made the mistake of unplanned endeavor. Descendant of pioneer stock in thought as well as body, she was a sturdy lady. She capitalized the inheritance of a tenacious will coupled with the cautious judgment of an indomitable courage that was matched only by the restlessness of her vision. She saw new horizons even as an anticipated goal was reached. So this lady never stopped. She had goals upon goals. And in consequence, she originated more of today's permanent institutions than any other single woman. She probably accomplished a lot more than any single man at the time. She began and fostered not one truly revolutionary movement, but a dozen. Other women of her period, flamingly identified with this or that cause, have been granted prompter appraisal by succeeding generations, but almost without exception, they died before their causes saw success. Mrs. Hale, plodding along day after day and year after year, her battleground, a sequestered editorial desk at which quietly she sensed the immediate need of each hour and ministered to it, saw all her projects mature in her own time. That's amazing too, because so many people, I guess we look at historically, they did things, but maybe didn't see, they didn't live long enough to see, what the ultimate result was. So that's pretty cool to see things like, that you worked on. And every effort she put forth, save the physical magazine she made famous, is still alive and flourishing. This was 1931. A few things have changed. Even parts of her long-defunct Lady's Book are more popular now than ever. A single original hand-colored Godey's fashion print is worth more today than was the cost of an entire year's subscription to the magazine. Incidentally, the highest priced on its market. So Godey's was an expensive book or magazine. I wonder how much it was. I don't see anything coming up that tells us, but that'll be something interesting to look into. I would assume that a single original hand-colored fashion print now is worth $1 bazillion. I do know that they did issue these little cards, and I don't know under, were they, trading cards? I don't know what they were. Trading cards seems ridiculous, but they were little cards that had, these type of illustrations. And those illustrations were, they were about fashion. They were showing you what the fashions were coming out of Paris. But these little cards, and Dr. Dunton, my guy, in his collection, I did find a little packet of these cards. And, they were little, like the size, I'd say like the size of an index card. And they were printed. They weren't anything like original. But I don't know where those would have come from. I guess it's something that you could order, or I don't know. Another thing to research. And who is not familiar with Godey's reproductions that depict impossible ladies cavorting in voluminous gowns over wallpapers, drapery fabrics, lampshades, dressing cases, waste baskets, and whatnot, designed for the decoration of the modern early American home. But it is not because of Godey's fashions that Sarah Hale must be given a place in memory, and certainly not because of her writings, which were sentimental enough to be contemporaneously popular, nor even because of her patriotic part in nationalizing Thanksgiving Day. Her real contribution lies in the fact that, having the soul of a modern, she understood and deliberately employed Victorianism as a link, a transition, between the lethargic indifference of the 18th century that regarded women as a highly prized chattel, and the 19th century's dream of women's destiny, economic and moral freedom. So this lady's like the ultimate feminist for the time. With the subtlety of the true leader, she never antagonized her Victorian public. She saw clearly that the affectations and absurdities of her times were mere reactions against a preceding age of great rudeness. Are we in that age now of great rudeness? And she dealt with them accordingly, her deeper self meanwhile focused on the morrow. Born in the final quarter of the 18th century, so she would have been born in like 17 something. She knew the uncouth frankness, brutality, and immorality of the 1700s as harsh realities. Wow. I mean, we knew the 1700s weren't easy, but... For though many a modern historian still retains enough of late Victorian inhibitions to ignore or gloss over the culmination of the crude and licentious in the social fabric of pre-revolutionary America, there remains the facts, clearly attested, of highways infested with gentlemen of the road, rape, preferment, slavery, dueling, hanging for petty theft, public whipping, wife beating, child selling, bundling, I don't know what that means, general as well as individual beastliness. So post-revolutionary America sounds kind of rough. 2024 is honestly not much different. Oh, Marrowdown. What is bundling? It's obviously something terrible because we're talking about individual beastliness. I feel like I've heard the term before and it is escaping me what it is. Is it something that is rated R? If it's something that you'd rather not say in polite society, you can DM it to me. These grim things the editor of Godey's knew to have existed in Victorianism's immediate past, and these she knew as but a few of the outrages Victorianism struggled to correct. Ruth Finley is making, a colonial period and the Victorian period just sound awful, and we kind of know. Taking one family's son and another family's daughter and giving them a shared bed overnight and expecting innocence. Okay. I'm trying to think, where did I read about that? I don't know if it was it might have had something to do with like planned marriages or bundling in America. That sounds interesting. I'm gonna have to check that out. There's a whole book about it. It has to do with like arranged marriages and stuff, right? Like, or is it? I'm trying to think. Did I read something about it in like a... I've read so much stuff lately. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna have to come back to that. That's interesting. All right. Thus herself a product of the final decadent years of the 18th century, Mrs. Hale never lost patience with the prudishness and evasions that were the inevitable results of the 19th century revolt. That she deplored the self-satisfaction of the age, its stubborn adherence to outmoded methods and customs, and above all, its willful blindness to changing educational and labor conditions, is evidenced in every issue of her magazine. Oh. You know, I have to say, I've seen, like, screenshots or, images of Godey's. I have never, like, held a copy of Godey's. I've never seen one, like, out in the wild. I'm sure we're going to find out. I don't know when it stopped publishing. I mean, I think it was literally in the 1800s. But I'd be very interested to know exactly what was in there. Again, I'm sure this would be an easy search to find out because I've just never done it. But she was too far-seeing to put herself outside the pale of conformity. Having visioned her goal, she set herself down in genteel effacement, feathered quill in hand, and for the full measure of 50 years proceeded to cajole her public into one reform after another. She sounds like the epitome of diplomacy, and like she just really had a handle on things. She had a vision, I think, that was she was ahead of her time, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Meticulously circumspect in the surface forms so dear to the heart of that bizarre social period, painstakingly careful never to offend the tender sensibilities of her easily shocked readers, she saw her most insidiously radical suggestions accepted with complacence. Oh. Anything advocated by Godey's must be right, and all because its editor never forget, nor lest her public forget, that she was a lady. So, I mean, I don't know that we necessarily have relationships with magazines like this anymore, but, just because of technology. But I would say during the late 20th century heyday of magazine publishing, there's some that stand out. The fashion magazines like Vogue. I mean, I think Vogue still, and Vanity Fair, those are kind of those high-end fashion magazines that also do like, really major journalism. Like they'll have journalistic articles, like long-form journalistic articles in them. And then there's the stuff like Cosmo and Elle that are still fashion magazines, but it's kind of like they don't necessarily have the most intellectual content. I mean, no shade. I mean, if you read those articles to jazz up your love life, that's cool. That's you. Yeah, Life magazine, that's also a good point. Yeah, Life magazine was very trusted. Time magazine, also another trusted one. I mean, these are the kind of things like if you read them, you get to know like some of the writers, and you trust what they say because, you see them often. And it seems to me like that's what Godey's was. It was the only one at, in the very beginning, and the public just came to respect her word. But it was not so with her contemporaries. Lucretia Mott, Susan Anthony, Emma Willard, Mary Lyon, Margaret Fuller, Lucy Stone, Elizabeth Blackwell, Harriet Beecher Stowe. These women now accounted great were the Hagars of their period. So, nobody liked them. They were noisy women. Denunciation as well as controversy raged about their heads, for they each one stepped outside to batter against the walls of accepted convention. They scandalized their public, and, with the single exception of Harriet Beecher Stowe, whose acute instinct for the sensational and dramatic would have won her followers in any age, their cohorts were few numerically and spiritually. They and their deeds were rejected by their times, not their ideas. And for this last, they were indebted to the greatest measure to their common friend, the lady editor of Godey's. She it was who encouraged Mary Lyon of Mount Holyoke. She who published Mrs. Stowe's first stories, and she who, in support of Elizabeth Blackwell, wrote editorial after editorial demanding the admittance of women into medical schools. She who press agented Emma Willard. Not a month passed during her entire half-century of editorship, but that Sarah Hale proclaimed the gospel of equal education, equal economic rights, equal recognition under the law, and equal professional opportunity for women. I don't think that I'm going to go way outside the bounds here. I'm not off the reservation because I think I know you guys well enough now. We're still struggling. Sarah, if you only knew all that you fought for and all that the people after you, took it to where we got it until the 2020s when things went a little sideways. And sometimes a lot sideways. So it would be so interesting if we, if Sarah Hale could talk to us today, what would she think? She would think, well, dang, y'all, I worked so hard. What have y'all been up to? Yeah. Equal rights. Mrs. Hale stayed always in the picture, a past mistress of mob psychology. Well, that's interesting. She was nevertheless a Victorian of Victorians, not insincere, only clever. And her following was legion. She and her magazine were the arbiter of the parlor, the textbook of the kitchen, the last word of authority in every home. So Kenny says, I think at that time frame, they were working on the most basic things, that they would be astounded that there was work to do, not even imagine. Absolutely. And I think that is such a good point, because we think like, okay, in her time, she's working with these women that, they're trying to get equal education. They're trying to get economic rights after their husband dies. Widows tended to have more rights than an unmarried woman, or even a married woman for that matter, in a lot of places. But, just this general right to be. And every time we make major strides in technology, I guess, and all the things, the conditions that women are working under, kind of get marginalized. We think, and I can most talk about this in terms of like IT and technology, because I have come out of that world. And, I feel like I am very, very fortunate. I absolutely know I've been in positions where I wasn't being paid as much as men. Absolutely 100%. And it's not without a little bit of shame that I didn't advocate. I feel like I didn't advocate for myself as much as I could when I was younger. But I sort of had the attitude at 50 years old, and it was a long time coming. I was this way in my 40s. Where I was kind of like, I will not accept anything less than equality. Are there things my husband can physically do that I can't? Yeah. So there's that lack of equality there. Are there things that, I birthed a baby. He didn't. It is the way things are that, we do have some inequalities just societally and our roles within them. We have come a long way, baby. Never ever give up sight of that. But, we still are struggling. We are still absolutely struggling. And I think that, there are so many parallels you can draw to the struggles women were having in this Victorian era, the struggles women had, say, in the 20s and the 30s, in the 40s and 50s. You think about during World War II, and even World War I, women left the home to go work in factories, doing things that they had never had the right to do, the opportunity, maybe not even the desire, but they went and did this. 50s, men came back from war, the women went back to the kitchen, and it's like, we came far in the 30s, the 40s, well, the 30s and the 40s, Rosie the Riveter, all that kind of stuff. But then we're back in the kitchen in the 50s. And then we have all of this stuff going on in, the 70s, my childhood. I remember all the Gloria Steinem and the, and things that happened in the 60s, of course, before my time. Um, so what? Martin referring to the bearded wonder that's genuine affection? Oh, oh, is that a husband, the bearded wonder? Yes, I do think, yes, absolutely. Okay, so bearded wonder's your husband. My husband too is a bearded wonder. Um, that's so funny. That's so sweet. Yeah, I call mine my beardy love. Yes, Kenny, in 1970s. Before the 1970s, you had to get a credit card in your husband's name. You could not get one in your own personal name. In fact, I think my mom didn't have a credit card in her own name until, I don't know, probably till the 80s. And my parents didn't have credit cards really when I was young. It was much later. I think probably when I was in high school. But nonetheless, yes, all of those things. And so I bring it back to today. Her hunk of junk. Oh my God. That is funny, Marjo. Yeah. Your mother sounds like a character. um, but I guess what I would say today, because my husband gets really mad at me when I kind of get on my feminist soapbox, and he's like, but we, but you, and I'm like, my dear, Ranger Cake, he's a park ranger, Ranger Cake. What you don't understand here is that some women don't live a life like I do. I do have a wonderful husband who, from the get-go, he was raised by people who were like, my mother-in-law did stay home and raise her kids. She did end up going to work a couple of times. She also did some kind of in-home daycare as a job. But, she and my father-in-law always had like this very, my father-in-law does dishes. My father-in-law does laundry. They had kind of traditional split in some ways, but also was, very, I don't know, I guess what you would consider my father-in-law to sort of be an enlightened man of the 70s and 80s, and my husband was raised that way, and he still is that way. I'm like, dude, there will be no dinner tonight because I am doing this stream. I'm getting ready to be done, guys, because I got to go run off to this other thing. And I told him, you're on your own for dinner. And he's like, okay, I'll cook dinner. No big deal. So I feel like I'm very, very lucky. And it sounds like many of you probably are too. You have husbands who, if you worked outside the home at some point in your life, or, whatever, they were willing to kick in and cook dinner, do laundry. They did more than just babysit their kids. Anytime I hear my husband's going to babysit the kids, I'm like, oh, does that mean you babysit the kids the other 23 hours of the day? That's and that's the kind of stuff that gets me in trouble sometimes when I say those things, because I was like, if the children are biologically yours and they live in your home 24 hours a day and you are taking care of them, you're not babysitting. Babysitting is when you get another person to temporarily watch your children. If you are a man or a woman and you are taking care of your children, you are taking care of your children. You're not babysitting. So, but I'm saying all of these things, and but women today, there are still women today that do not enjoy that level of equality in their homes. Yeah. Your husband was raised to be fully independent, so he wouldn't burn his wife. Yeah. So you had a wonderful mother-in-law, or have a wonderful mother-in-law. That's awesome. I feel very lucky to have found my husband, because he he had the kind of upbringing that I very much respect and value. But I mean, all of us know women who don't, they are still required to raise the children and be pretty and, support their husband, and in some cases bring home the bacon too. And, when I look at my grandmother, who, she did work outside the home very briefly. When my mom and her one brother were young, she like drove the little school bus kind of thing. But she never really had like a career outside the home. My mother did. And she just retired not long ago, a couple years ago. But I look at, what my grandmother's life was like, and, she could devote 24 hours to and sometimes it was close to it, to keeping her house spotless and making sure the kids were fed, and then down the road her grandchildren, because my grandmother had a lot of impact on my upbringing. I lived with her occasionally. She was just very involved in my life. So she not only raised her kids, she also raised her grandchildren. And the women of mid-century, that's the kind of stories you hear. And then people of my mom's generation, she went to work, and she was home with me when I was very small, but economically in the 70s, but my mom and dad had to work. They couldn't have made it without, they wouldn't have been able to buy a house. They wouldn't have, really been able to put food on the table if they didn't both, work. And, I know my mother never enjoyed equality in the workplace until she went to work for the federal government. And the federal government has, a pay grade system that kind of closes the gap some. But when looking at the fact, like, my mom had to go back and get her degree to be able to move up in the federal government, whereas many men who were her equals, like, in terms of job responsibilities, got the chance to go to college right out of high school. And so they already had that degree, and they had gotten an advanced degree. And so they easily got higher levels than she did as far as pay grade. She didn't get to go to college because my grandfather said, no, you don't need to go to college. So my mom said, okay, middle finger, I'm going to get married 3 weeks after I graduate from high school. And that's what she did. And, I guess I'm long story short here. I'm just, I'm always cognizant of how many rights that we women do have, yet how many rights we still are struggling with just because of the nature of society, the nature of motherhood. Motherhood complicates things so very badly. I would not give up my child. I love him so much. Being his parent is just the best thing. Thank you, Jared. But yeah, having given birth to a child and having to raise him, it complicates things. And, again, I'm so lucky. I had a husband who was like, oh, no problem, I can diaper a baby. I had a younger brother, and he was willing to do that. But a lot of men still don't. A lot of men still don't do that. And they live by a mindset that women are just made for raising kids and doing housework. But also the economy's bad, so they need to bring in some money too. I don't know if any of you have, I might not get past this first chapter today. I don't know if any of you have read, there was I think it was New York Times, or it might have been one of the British newspapers or magazines. I'm trying to think. I just saw it the other day and I didn't get a chance to read it, but then I listened to a podcast about it. There's an article out there about Ballerina Farm, and it's kind of an expose. It talks about the life of this woman. She was formerly a ballerina. She was Juilliard trained. But she and her husband are a somewhat conservative, traditional, fundamentalist religion. And I don't want to go off onto the religious thing I went off on the other day. But, fundamentalist, very conservative, very, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, women having less rights than men kind of situation. And this woman was a very accomplished dancer. Like I said, Juilliard trained. Only a few people get into those programs. And she gave it all up to get married, have 8 children, and her husband runs the farm that's called Ballerina Farm. She is not listed on the farm business or property. It's all owned by her husband. So if, God forbid, something happened to him, I don't know, hopefully he has a will that gives it to her. I don't know. Or takes care of her and her children in some way. But the way that the journalist presented it was very clear that her husband runs the business, her husband runs the family, that she is also expected to do all of these things along with managing her 8 children. And her husband feels that they're going to have some more because they want to fill up their 15-person van. And, to each their own with how many children they have. But my whole thing is, if you, as a family, cannot raise your children in a loving and safe and supported environment, then you have too many children. I'm sorry. I know I will probably get, ripped one way or another by someone eventually for saying this, but I have one child because I could not afford to have another one. It would, at the time my husband and I decided we're not going to have any more because just, I truly, it boggles my mind how people with like 3, 4, 5 kids can get them, through college if they all want to go to college, food on the table, clothes on their back, all that stuff. And 4 bench seats, 1 per child. I love it. But yeah, 15 kids, like the kids are raising each other. I think there must be some kind of statistical point where a parent, especially if they do not have the support of their spouse, like they're doing it all, and the spouse is just babysitting occasionally. There has to be a point. I don't know. Is it 5 kids? Is it 6 kids? Is it 3 kids? I don't know. There has to be a point where you cannot parent effectively. Your kids are going to be neglected in some way. And I'm not saying that this is abusive, although it can be. I mean, you've seen this stuff on TV and in the news about, these giant the Duggars, enormous family. Parents don't know what's going on at the one end because they're too busy with the toddlers and the babies. So the teenagers and the kids that are like, at adulthood are trying to raise the rest of them. I mean, it's just a real messy situation. And I just, back in the pioneer days when we had, great child mortality, I absolutely get that, we just need to keep having kids because they're going to die and we got to have somebody to run the farm. But in today's day and age, the reason why people have that many children, 15, 20 kids, is because of their religion. I don't know. I've never seen, and maybe there's folks out there. Elon Musk seems to be one. He seems to have no faith or spirituality, but he subscribes to this. But everyone else, I feel like I've read about, seen TV shows and documentaries about, listened to podcasts, like all that stuff. The people who have tons and tons of kids are ascribing to the go forth and multiply aspect of the Bible. And in our day and age, I think that it creates a situation where people are not raised well. I'm sorry to say. They have trauma from childhood, from not having good relationships with their parents, for being not supervised well, not supported well, all that. So anyway, I'm going way off the reservation. But my point is, it's amazing to me to read this stuff about Sarah Hale and to think all the stuff that she and her cohorts, the Susan B. Anthony's and the Harriet Beecher Stowe's, the things they worked towards. And yes, I think Kenny said it earlier, they would be like gobsmacked about, what we've got going on today in terms of like, oh my gosh, okay, you can vote, you can work outside the home, you can, all that stuff. You want to have babies and, for whatever reason, you can't have babies. Well, you can go adopt babies. You can have somebody else have your babies. You can have in vitro fertilization, like all this stuff. I think they would just be like, wow. But we get down to brass tacks. I think they would still be like, okay, how many women work in technology? Now, what was Gamergate? I mean, just the things that are in the news today. So, all right, I digressed. Stepping off my soapbox. Let's finish this chapter. So I'm gonna go back to reading this. I think I already read this, but I'm gonna restart. Mrs. Hale stayed always in the picture, a past mistress of mob psychology. She was nevertheless a Victorian of Victorians, not insincere, only clever. And her following was legion. She and her magazine were the arbiter of the parlor, the textbook of the kitchen, and the last word of authority in every home. But he was the father of her children, she would sob, and it is the nature of woman to be affectionate and forgiving. She has doubtless too much, for her own happiness, of the trusting faith which whispers, I know not, I ask not, if guilt's in the heart, I know that love thee, whatever thou art. I know that I love thee, whatever thou art. This cunningly pandering to the sentimental idealism of the times, even as in the same editorial on the rights of married women, she thundered at state legislatures. And these are also her words. The barbarous custom of wresting from women whatever she possesses, whether by inheritance, donation, or her own industry, and conferring it upon the man she marries to be used at his discretion and will, perhaps wasted on his wicked indulgences, without allowing her any control or redress, is such a monstrous perversion of justice by law that we might well marvel how it would obtain in a Christian community. Snap. And so she worked from within, boring at the very foundations of the Victorian structure and succeeding where others who attacked from without failed. With no blare of trumpets or torchlight procession, she created an implement of tremendous power. By the middle of the century, she had built Godey's to a subscription list of 150,000 people, the largest circulation attained by any monthly up to the day she relinquished her editorship. Here, then, was an audience the like of which no other woman had ever addressed. Month after month, decade after decade, always at one with that audience, Sarah Josepha Hale, above all other women of her time, speeded the thought and progress of her sex in this country. And also, this little blip that she said at the to the state legislatures. Apparently, this was actually published in Godey's Lady's book, May 1837. 1837. So we're talking almost we're getting up into 200 years ago that Sarah Josepha Hale was talking about the same things that we are sometimes having to address today, and domestic violence, women's rights, women's access to money. Not to spend a whole lot more time on it, but going back to that example with the ballerina farm, I just look at that situation and I think, like, well, it would be a wonderful thing that even though they're very conservative and traditional in their methods, it doesn't sound like the ballerina is loving it. It sounds like she's very much at the end of her rope. In fact, there's one quote, and definitely go, if you're interested in this stuff, go read it, because it's something else. But she says something, or no, her husband says something to the effect of, sometimes between the raising the children, participating in the business, and their business is like they do, like farm to table type, like meat boxes and stuff. They have like, and now they're getting into dairy stuff. The term for this, and I don't know if you've heard this term, it's called tradwife. It's a traditional wife. It is a movement, particularly with younger women, millennial women, very like religious millennial women often that are doing this. And there are some kind of insidious aspects of it that I'm not going to get into because it's not all real clear to me. But specifically with Ballerina Farm, her husband says, she's participating in the business and she's raising 8 children. And these are small children. This is not like the range of adult to baby. This is like, I don't know, 8 kids that are like all under 14 or something, or all under 10. I can't remember what the oldest one is, but there's a big chunk of them that are like toddler to early elementary. Like, there's a lot of them. And it just children. So many children. So she's doing that all day. And then she's also doing all of this stuff on social media. So I don't know if you guys have ever tried to keep up with doing any social media, like just a regular post or something. It is hard. But this woman, she does like these kind of professionally, she's got this beautiful house and she's got the beautiful children and all of the stuff. So she does these very curated social media online things. And it is not the reality. As we all know, those things are very curated. So what her husband says is, well, all of these things she's involved in, sometimes, she's just got to go to bed for a week or so to recover from it. Are you kidding me? Like, that infuriated me. I was like, seriously? Supposedly you're running this business together and you're supposedly co-raising these kids, but it doesn't sound like he pitches in with the laundry or something, which I'm sure is astronomical for 8 children. But it doesn't. It sounds like the lion's share of the work with the children is she's managing it, and on top of having to try to keep up with social media, and when you're keeping up with social media, you've also got people out there that you correspond with, you interact with. I mean, it's not just like I'm going to throw this video up and then walk away. Like you have to be involved, even if she's got like a person that they pay to do that. She's still involved. So the very fact that she has to she basically has a little breakdown every now and then and has to go to bed for a week, that is such a problem. And I mean, that's spouse abuse, right? I mean, if he was a good husband, and my husband has done this, you've got too much on your plate. What can I do to help? And or what are you going to get rid of? Because you're working yourself to death. You're going to be sick. You're going to, that's the kind of thing somebody should say to her. And if her husband loved her, he would be the one saying it. But well, and it's wrong of me to say if her husband loved her. I genuinely hope he loves her with all his heart. But it was distressing to hear about that and to read that article. And it's just, again, it's interesting. I don't want to belabor it, but it's really interesting to read this and what Sarah Josepha Hale was chasing, and what we know that the other women of her time, like I said, the Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she's a little bit later, Harriet Beecher Stowe, like all these people were fighting for women's rights. And there's still women in our communities that have it all but also have nothing, really. So wow, I didn't mean to end on a bummer. I hope this is an interesting book. Are you guys, this first chapter, do you like it? Does it sound like, I mean, I'm definitely intrigued to go further. I want to know more about this whole story and all these things she worked with. So, it looks like that these future chapters, she's got dates and stuff, so we'll be able to piece together the history a little bit better. So, all right, you guys, I got to go get some spreadsheets together for my next thing. Tomorrow we have quilt nerding. As usual, we're reading, you guys probably all already know this, but we're reading Patchwork Pillowcases by our friend Anne Hermes. We're on the second section of that. And you can find all that on the Quilt Nerding Instagram, or if you belong to the Quilt Nerding group on Facebook, you'll find all that info. This week is not a Needlework Nights week. So I will be back on Thursday. And Thursday, I will be done with my not done, but I will have gotten through the big heavy lifting of this project this week. So I will hopefully have some more interesting things for you that are quilt related, and then we'll keep going on this because yeah, it sounds like it's good. So have a wonderful week, you guys. I hope this Monday is a wonderful start to your week. And as always, we'd like to know how she got started. Yeah. Right. Bury her husband and then become there's some stuff that happened in there, and I think that's the next chapter, because it looked like it said something like writer wife. Yeah, so I think we're gonna find out like what happened when her husband died, so it'll be interesting. Hopefully she's everything we know about her. She's a wonderful lady and she's gonna be our hero. So as always, thank you guys. You are my hero. You are my heroes, and I love you all so much, and always appreciate the support. So go forth and stitch, go forth and read, go forth and do the things you have to do this week. And I will either see you tomorrow night on Quilt Nerding on YouTube, or I will see you on Thursday here. So take care, guys, and mwah!